focusing on the world as we go forward over the next, it depends on your timeline, it's anywhere from 6 months to 18 months to more, of having large language model powered and or other technologies powering increasingly autonomous systems. Those systems that we don't have to get into really specific definitions of agents, but where they're doing things more than one step at a time without a human fully in the loop, and doing things that are increasingly consequential and useful. And this is partly just because this is kind of the economic basin of attraction of if you can do something without a lot of human in the loop, then you can do it for cheaper, and if it's something that's useful to do, that's just an economically useful thing. And so just given kind of capitalism, we're moving towards more autonomous AI. Given obviously the underlying trends of more powerful AI technology, which I'll take as for granted given the audience here. Okay, thanks. And so that's kind of the context. That's the setting the stage here for what I'm kind of presuming for AI technology. So then the question is with that capable of AI and with the economic incentives that move that towards more agentic AI, well then how do we start to think about how to align AI with what we want? And most of what AI alignment is about in terms of lesswrong.com and alignmentforum.com and other sources of the past 10 years of a focus, very deep thinking about alignment is more focused on what some people might call intent alignment, where it's you have a human and then you have an AI system, and then it's kind of a one-to-one or maybe a one-to-many, but it's not really on the human side focused on more than one human very much. And so that's an interesting problem. How do you solve intent alignment? But even once you solve intent alignment, you have AIs running around, and once you have more than one doing something, then you have to worry about the problem of externalities. So then how do you say what an AI should or shouldn't do, not just with the intent of the human that it's working for, but all the other humans and all the other AIs? And so then you have a problem of just further trying to specify when an AI does something, you have some state of the world, it could do some action. What's the reward? What's the value of the thing it could do in that state of the world? And you have infinite permutations of that, right? Infinite permutations of state of the world, action that we take, and reward placed on it. So now this is a problem of, you can kind of break it down as a specification problem. How do you specify all the possible values, all the rewards you could place on any action taken, conditional on the context, conditional on the state of the world? So we need sort of a specification language to go from the human and to tell the agent what to do. And we need some sort of shared specification language. And there's a few different options here. Plain language, just the way you normally right now prompt an LLM, that's good in that it's interpreted within the context. There's a lot baked into each word. It's very flexible. But it's really unpredictable format, and it's hard to use it really systematically and scalably as a specification language for what an AI should do. A programming language, on the other hand, it's really consistent structure, so it's very efficient. But the downside is that it's interpreted really literally. So you don't have anything really baked into each word, each directive. It's just interpreted literally. And then you have things like legal standards and legal interpretive techniques that have been developed over centuries that potentially push you out kind of further on the efficient frontier of this made up Y and X axis here that are better at interpreting within context. It's much more flexible, but also there is some more consistency to the structure of it. So we've seen specification problems before. So parties to legal contracts, they can't foresee all the potential if-then contingencies of the future relationship, that there's no presumption that they're even trying to do that when they enter into a contract. And similarly, legislators, they're even less so trying to spell all these things out. And they're not trying to predict all the circumstances that their bills are going to be applied once they're enacted. So similarly, we can't also specify ahead of time all the if-then rules that would provably direct good AI behavior. So if we can leverage what we've learned around creating contracts, creating legislation, creating regulation, if we can leverage
that both in terms of the processes, the methodologies, and also even the data to further train models, then that might be one way to have a more robust specification and interpretation of what are our inherently vague goals. Because again, we can't specify everything that we would possibly want. It's inherently vague. So we have lawmaking processes, we have the interpretations of the laws, we have the drafting of contracts, the interpretations of those, and then legal reasoning more broadly. Those things could power additional AI capabilities to better interpret human directives. And so a relevant thing here in sort of the legal theory and just also practice is this idea of this distinction between a rule and a standard. So a rule is something that you could, like from a computational perspective, encode it basically in if-then statements in Python. But a standard is something that you can't do it like that because it's something that is capturing more of the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. And so standards are a key one. It's kind of a pillar of a lot of stuff in the US, at least, is what is like a prudent man, what does a reasonable person do in a given situation? And then there's other ones that we'll talk about as well. So the standards, they're really helping to convey the spirit of something. And that cuts to the heart of part of the AI alignment problem is like one of the problems is that we're too dumb for ASI to be able to understand how when we say something, there's all these unintended implications of what we said, where it could go off and turn us all into paper clips. And so if we can have it better understand the spirit of what we meant, then that's important. So one really important legal standard in practice in the United States is a fiduciary duty. And so that's something where there's no way that a more powerful thing than me in terms of a specific domain, so a financial advisor managing my money, a doctor managing my health, etc., I'm going to be able to know better than them all the things they shouldn't do. So instead of doing that, I just say, hey, be a fiduciary to me. And so embedded within that is the codification of tens of thousands of previous enforcement actions and court opinions and other situations where there's been an interpretation and an iteration of what that means to be a fiduciary. So that was all about the first half of the talk, or I'll go faster for the second half, was all about this alignment problem between an AI and a human, or an AI and a company, or whoever's trying to direct AI. This now part of the talk is about, okay, now that we've done that, let's say that works, we have the AI doing what the spirit of what we want it to do, but there's a lot of other people having other AIs do what they want it to do. And so now, how do we deal with the societal implications of that, the externalities I mentioned at the very beginning? There's a lot of things to consider. Whose views? How do we elicit those views? How do we aggregate and synthesize those views? There's been millennia of work on sort of this social choice theory related strand of things of how do you do this from a purely kind of rational perspective. We have an answer to those three questions, though. We already have a solution, and it's the democratic iterative process of eliciting those values, synthesizing them in a way that's become legitimized, and then updating to adapt over time with the evolving will of the people. These are the main ways that people are talking about doing this in terms of society AI alignment. So you have descriptive ethics. That's where you just have a lot of human behavior out there. All these decisions been made, survey results. You take that data, that's great. That's a good thing about this one. It has empirical data. You can train on that data to learn what the ethical thing to do is for society AI alignment. But the downside is there's a lot of data out there that's not about good behavior. There's a lot of descriptive stuff about behavior in the world that's not good. And we don't have a mechanism to officially weed that out when we're trying to do this approach. The other one is prescriptive ethics. So this is more of a top-down thing. Instead of just using empirical data, we use normative frameworks like utilitarianism or other philosophical theories. But as we know, I mean, there's been many, many years of debate, and it'll never be solved. What is the ultimate philosophical theory? What's the ultimate normative ethics? So then the middle one tries to borrow from the good thing of prescriptive ethics, which is it's a human interpretable normative framework. It's not just what do people do, it's what should they do. And it borrows from that for this middle column, And it borrows the good thing from descriptive ethics because there's real data, there's actual empirical stuff that we can train on. The downside, though, to this approach of using law as the society AI alignment framework is it's more about what not to do than what to do. So there's always going to be some need for when you're trying to kind of load up the goals of the AI, there's going to be some need for some normative ethics. That's the part that's missing there. But then just to kind of like high level visualize what this is talking about, it's saying there's all the possible actions that an AI agent could take. There's some small subset of that of actions that are aligned with public law. And then there's an even smaller subset of that if we can further constrain it into the ones that are aligned with the individual or the company that is directing the AI agent through standards and through other frameworks like that. And so what does this do? There's the traditional AI and law pillars of basically better governing AI with law. That's easier to do if the AI understands law. And then there's using AI to inform and improve law, which is the traditional mission of most legal tech. And then there's this other kind of flavor to this around the aligned AI stuff, where if you have better law-informed AI, it could be more useful AI, and that's the first part of what I talked about. And then it could be more societally aligned AI as well. So it could potentially power these 4 different pillars. And then last slide is that the side effect of that, though, is that if law is informing powerful AI agents and you have more and more power and capabilities of those AI agents, then it actually makes it even more weighty and more meaningful to engage in the deliberative process of lawmaking and to be part of the political process of voting for people and pushing in a certain way that you want, because that's the mechanism that's now informing even more powerful intelligent systems. And then finally, we should also definitely use it in the other direction too, of helping to improve law, but we have to be really careful with that, because if we're using law as the way to align AI, we can't use AI too directly in the process of creating the law, because that kind of messes up the feedback loop there. So we could do some questions or something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so first question, so what are some of the scenarios that you imagine this applying to? So for example, in my head as you spoke, I imagined an email agent that had been given some high-level goal, but was an autonomous agent that would contact people and try to compel them to do something for the creator. And you didn't want the email agent to impersonate, for example, an FBI officer or a police officer. You wanted to just say be straightforward about who it was, or maybe some gray middle ground without trespassing legal boundaries. Is that a good example of a context for this kind of automated governance, or do you have something else in mind? Like,
yeah, that's
some examples.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting example. Another one is around. If we riff off this example I talked about around fiduciaries, it's around like investment advisors. So when you're an investment advisor, like you have a fiduciary to your clients, and so increasingly AI is good enough to put together like pretty high quality financial plans for people. And when you're doing that, though, like you have a duty of loyalty, and that means like you don't do anything that would help the company that the AI is working for more than the client. And then you have a duty of care, which is you want to do something that's appropriate for the clients in their best interest, and it's like a good plan. And so in terms of like, what do those things mean? That's like, there's no rule book. Like the only way to figure that out is to look at a bunch of court opinions, a bunch of enforcement actions, all the different ways that people have refined what those components of fiduciary duties mean in the context of certain situations. And so it's one of those where it's such a subtle standard, but such an important one that there's no other kind of way to do that besides this way, I think.
I'm curious, John, so the idea that if an AI kind of groks law and follows it, I agree, like that would be as close to solving as I can imagine, right? The AI is just like, well, I'm not gonna break the law. And it could be annoying, it could be obnoxious, it could make jokes, people don't, you know, but big picture. But my understanding with these LLMs, right, all they really do is they guess the next word, right? That's all they really do.
Yep.
And then we as humans say, but if you guess this word, we assume, right, now I want all these other things to happen. But the LLM has no idea what we've put on top of that. The LLM has no idea that if it guesses yes is the next word, we're about to go turn people into paper clips, right?
Does it know?
Well, I don't understand how it can, right? Because that's something we put on top of it, right? Like that happens downstream,
So
right?
in a tool use context where, perhaps it's like a military application and it says fire, not fire.
Right, but for the LLM, it's like, listen, all I know is whatever came above, I feel like fire's coming next. That's my prediction. And if we, use reinforcement, there are different ways we can kind of tweak that. But then it's not actually ever making that guess based on, because now case text has hooked me up to this thing that's going to cause these other things, right? So where is the substrate to put in law? Does that make sense? Like if you can't, right? If the LLM is just going to guess based on probability, completely unaware that if anything else has happened, when does the LLM get to go, well, hold on, I'm not going to guess yes now, because that's going to lead to this thing. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to think of the like where in the flow you can put it.
Yeah. So first, on the first thing about predicting the next token. So, like what I'm about to say, like we'll see, but I think like if you just like as a thought experiment, I think it's useful to think through. So if you can predict the next word with 100% accuracy across the entire internet, it hasn't been able to do that yet, but I'm just, for sake of argument, if you can do that, to be able to do that, then you have to kind of back up, well, what do you need to be able to do that? You need to be able to simulate for any type of kind of situation that's ever been encountered on the internet, like put yourself in the shoes of the speaker, of the person they're speaking to, and kind of simulate their psychology, simulate their reasoning process, and a lot of other instrumental goals and capabilities. So that's kind of the potential scale is all you need argument, where if you could literally predict the next word with 100% accuracy, the only way you could do that is by instrumentally learning all these things and having some crazy representation of it somewhere in the network. So that's just like one thing, but maybe that doesn't pan out. Maybe we're going to hit some plateau where that doesn't happen. But then the other thing is like, I think what's interesting to explore is that instead of just predicting the next word, there's, as we all know, there's a lot of interesting structure to legal data. And so if there's enough scale of it, I think there's interesting ways to basically tokenize the data differently. So it's not on the word, it's on certain other legal structures that are embedded within the legal text. And so I think through time that if you do that, if you scaled that up, the hypothesis is that actually could lead to learning more emergent concepts related to law. That's just the hypothesis.
Yeah, I mean, in practice, I expect all the controls, like training data, for example, in the case of copyright law, where the reaction people had to image models generating violations of copyright law was to remove data that would lead to that happening, or prompting, where you say, you are an AI email agent. Do not violate the law in any way, especially by impersonating such and such categories of people. And the model, if it follows instructions, will realize its context based on your prompt and act on that basis.
In your question also, it's first of all, I'm not saying I disagree with you, but I just laid out kind of two potential ways that maybe you could further the learning of those things. But separately from that, and what I'm actually doing at my company is not those things there as of right now. We're focused on more of a multi-agent scenario. So we're focused on like, how could you start to approach this problem by having other agents almost adversarially interact and having them provide some of these constraints and some of these guardrails. So that's another potential approach.
Okay. So like, I definitely don't doubt that an LLM can really start to understand law and more concepts to the point if I asked it like, is this illegal or not? Or like, what should you do here? That it would answer like, right? But I guess I'm thinking it's like it's sort of a technical thing, but like, I mean, there's this Italian mafioso guy, and the way he really got hit on some of these, he said, I got a pebble in my shoe. And like, that's all you said, and they knew, like I get what you're saying, right? But the mafia guy knew everyone around him how they were going to interpret that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the LLM, unless you tell it for every scenario, you know what
I see what you're saying.
Right?
Yeah,
Just saying, like,
it just doesn't have that context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it will say, again, just guess what comes next.
Yeah.
And what happens based on that is based on what humans tell it to now do.
I see your point. Yeah.
And as long as they don't care about law,
Yeah.
then you're stuck again, right? So it's just about the very precise mechanism for the,
Yes.
right?
So Pablo, how did it pass the bar exam? Like just guessing what the next word is?
Yeah,
Not having some kind of like concept of like legal
That's just
reasoning.
it. It's not that LLMs can't kind of internalize law. I mean, my God, yes, they absolutely can.
Right.
But in terms of building systems where there's some mechanism by which it checks the illegality, the LLM, if it's not aware of what's going to happen based on what it says next, isn't asking itself, is this legal or not? Right? Does that, like,
You could, given the current state of technology, what you will have is certainly some AGI system that will retrieve the relevant law to the situation and inject them into the prompt with something telling, please respect that. And I think it should be mandatory actually for every AI autonomous agent system.
if we allow for new architectures that haven't been invented yet, that solve this problem as it would solve basically any problem it can solve, right? Like what it could be.
Yeah.
I think in the LLM paradigm.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, but and also just a clarification is this talk is the kind of the point of this talk is that I'm basically saying like something that everyone in this room thinks is really obvious, but a lot of other people don't, which is like we, you know, when OpenAI, for example, talks about like AI alignment, it's about more of the intent alignment problem. It's about how do you align an artificial superintelligence with one human's intent. That's basically the technical AI alignment problem as defined by most people. And so I'm just trying to like reframe the discussion and say, regardless of architecture, like we have this amazing like database of democratically determined societal guidelines sitting in front of us. Like, let's start to work on how to codify that and encode that.
That part I love. Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize it, but like the best you're gonna get for alignment is law abiding. I think is a fantastic paradigm to think about because that is the best we've done to align each other, or realize that like we're not that aligned, but this is what we got. Like that's
Yeah, and in some circles, that's the statement you just said is like a controversial statement because there's in some circles it's sort of a libertarian like techno utopian approach where it's like fuck all the existing laws, like they're too problematic. Well, yeah, and I mean it's obviously like I completely agree that law is not perfect, and like, you know, democracy is the worst way of doing it besides all the others. Is basically the answer.
You know what I love about this concept of law-abiding AI in the context of alignment is that I think a lot of the problems that the alignment community has are with AI systems that cause lots of harm to people. And it's clear that the legal system will constrain companies to creating AI systems that don't cause that harm or face immense consequence from the legal system.
Yeah, that's a really good point because
that is not appreciated.
Yeah.
Less wrong or the alignment forum, mostly because they work with superintelligence rather than like sort of the pragmatics of corporate law.
Yeah,
like,
and that's a really good point because there's these groups where you have AI ethics, which is obviously important, and then you have AI alignment, and then you have, I guess, EACC, and so with like the AI ethics and AI alignment, like there's not much Venn diagram there because of what you just said. But this is like, I'm hoping that this is sort of the Venn diagram because like this is the way to address like bias and discrimination in AI ethics, because to the extent that those are encoded in our laws, that's great. To the extent that they're not, then you should definitely call your senator and talk about it.
Any other questions?
Which country's laws are we aligning the AI to?
The United States.
Why?
It's the best country in the world. It's the best country in the world. This is the part we can probably delete. Yeah, no, it's a great question. That's like there's no solve for that. I mean, it really
jurisdiction as well, I guess. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just wherever I mean, I guess the actual answer is just like wherever the AI is sitting, like that's where you.
The safest would be every country's laws.
Yeah.
You'll never violate anyone's laws, and then you get somebody new and be like, "Come on, you can do that here. Come on, like this country, you can do that." But in theory, if it's like, sorry, it violates anybody's laws, and we gotta play it safe with me because I'm an AGI, so.
Oh no, you're right. That is the cool conservative approach.
That would be like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We're gonna have to call North Korea in a while.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I could never talk about Winnie the Pooh with my AI because it would violate China's laws.
Yeah.
Wait, but one other quick thing on that is that, like, one thing that's really interesting is to think about what are sort of the constituent components of law that are consistent across, like, all the sort of democratic nations. And to the extent that, like, we can use AI to help us, like, parse that and figure that out, and then use that as a starting point that's sort of accepted across that block of countries, that could be an interesting approach.
I would love to see that actually happen, aligning all the laws of all the different countries. I think that's a harder problem than AI.
Oh yeah, I just mean from like a scientific perspective,
Yeah.
like trying to parse it all and like figure that out as like a science project, and then implementing that is a whole different story.
There's also, I mean, this old literature about when certain groups actually prefer to use social norms over the law. Right?
Yeah.
You know, whatever, you know, it's kind of 1950s kind of research on
Yeah.
traveling salespeople that, you know, have certain contracts, but
Definitely.
they're like not enforcing the contracts because they're
Totally.
social norms. So in certain contexts,
Yeah.
you know, if the AI actually, you know, kind of, if the law is the fallback, then it might actually sour the human relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, and that's also why I think like applying this approach to AI instead of to humans is my approach is like, because I like to apply this approach rigorously, like it's just not something that I would want to apply onto humans because I think it would do exactly what you just said.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Thanks.